For my first book club pick, I've chosen Becoming by Michelle Obama. It was published in 2018 and it's a memoir. In this memoir, she talks about her life in three separate chunks. The first being her childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood in the section called Becoming Me. In the next section called Becoming Us, she talks about her life with Barack Obama, being newlyweds, and her time on the campaign trail with him and in the White House. And then in the third chunk, it called Becoming More. She talks about her time leaving the White House and what her life means to her now as a former First Lady. And I think this memoir is a great choice to teach because for several reasons. The first being that because it's a memoir, she writes in the first person and she has a really familiar style of writing. And I think it gives students the chance to see someone who is such an important figure in history as being someone who could be more personable to them. And I like that because in a lot of English classes, I think students are sometimes only given texts that are written in a very kind of prescribed writing manner. So with Shakespeare and other, I guess, important texts, when I was in high school, my senior class, we read Hamlet, we read Crime and Punishment, and Brave New World, and a lot of important texts, but a lot of texts that didn't actually reflect the way that we spoke and the way that we lived our lives. We didn't make a lot of connections to our world from these texts, even though it's possible. And I think by using a memoir, there's a very, I guess, easy way to make those connections. And so I think that's why it's a valuable text to students today. I also think it's a valuable text because a lot of experiences that she talks about when she was a young student, I think are really relevant to a lot of experiences that students may have today. She talks about when she was in high school and she was thinking about colleges that she wanted to go to, and she was thinking about going to Princeton for her undergrad, and she was told by a counselor that she wasn't Princeton material. And I think it's a very real experience that students still face today about being told that they're not either worth the time to spend to helping them go to college or a specific college. And I think by seeing someone who is such, such an accomplished figure in our political history, that students can feel more valued themselves. And I think her writing style also opens just another way of students to see themselves as a writer rather than just a reader in an English class and nothing more. Because her sense of writing is so familiar and personable, I think students can make a connection to how they may feel they could be a writer. And the texts that I talked about that I had read in high school weren't the way that we spoke, and I never saw myself as someone who could be a writer. I really still don't think writing is something that I see in my future other than just maybe for myself. But that's something that took a while for me to think about, and I think by assigning a memoir in a class can open just a lot more opportunities for students to see themselves as writers. And so I think that helps with all literacy skills because it makes writing not such a distant skill or practice that isn't that couldn't be accomplished at all. And I think this memoir connects to our course because I think it can fall prey to either being undertaught or overtaught. Undertaught, I think, is something that can be attached to this because she writes so familiarly and she's such a personable writer, I think teachers could easily assign chapters of this at a time and not find those sections that students could spend a lot more time in, rather than just reading through the whole thing right away and not spending any type of time either analyzing it or thinking about personal connections. And I think it could also be overtaught because in this memoir she makes different connections about I guess experiences in her life. There's one, and she talks about her manner of speaking and I guess her language. Early on in the book, she talks about how spending some time with her family, some of her cousins had asked her why she talked like a white girl, and that meant what that meant to a young black girl could be as, I guess, betraying her community and her family and just her way of growing up. And then she also makes a connection to her way of speaking later on in her life when she's a young associate at a law firm. She talks about how she felt trilingual because she was able to speak easily with her friends and her family and community, and also in her professional life. She says that she also spoke lawyer too. And I think students can also relate to that because students sometimes don't have the choice but to be multilingual. They can speak a certain way at school, can speak a certain way with their friends, and then sometimes with their family speaking just a different language entirely. So I think those connections are definitely important to make throughout the book, but I think spending too much time on every single connection that is possible in this book can make it become a book that is overtaught, and the connections that I think could be so valuable to students are lost in these very specific connections if I guess you're spending months and months on this memoir. It's over 500 pages, so it could be possible to spend, months at a time on this, but I think because her writing style flows so easily that students could get through this book a lot quicker and make those meaningful connections because they aren't spending, every class spent looking at just 5 details that they found. They could, I guess, make their own personal connections without being told the connections that they should be making. Overall, I just think this is a great book, and even if maybe a teacher wouldn't want to teach this specific book, I think memoirs in general are a great addition to a classroom. I was deciding whether I should talk about this one or Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I just think a lot of memoirs in general are a great way to allow students to see themselves and see figures that they may admire as someone who they have personal connections with. And I just think it'd be a great book in all classrooms.